The best golfer in the world. You met him in the bathroom as you were taking a leak.
There's 3 urinals. Guys typically don't go to the middle urinal, so I go to the far urinal, and then this guy walks up into the one right next to me. And literally, I look over, I'm like, oh my God. It was Jack Nicklaus. I just zip it up and walk back away. I'm not gonna say anything to him while he's taking a leak. He's all, don't worry, it happens to me too. I'm like, oh my God, he knows that I got stage fright. Had to zip it up and walk out.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Learn Like a CPA show. I'm your host, Ryan Bakey. Today, a very special guest, one of my mentors, one of my coaches, somebody I've super excited to bring on the show that I've been working with for over 2 years now, Mr. Bill Faeth.
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Ryan, for having me. I'm glad I could finally make it after 2 years.
So, Bill, there's a lot of stuff that you've taught me one-on-one, in person, over the phone, and we're not going to be able to get into all that context today on the podcast, but what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is a little bit about your background. So a lot of people don't know about you is that you used to actually play a professional golf and you golf with Tiger Woods. Can you share that a little bit about that story?
I don't know how much of a story it is. I mean, I've played with him hundreds of times. We grew up together. Wow. And I will say I've only beat him twice that I can remember of. One was at Isleworth. We used to go down and visit him, me and some other friends like Jerry Chang and Jason Gore, Chris Riley, actually former Ryder Cup. We all grew up just playing golf in Southern California. So for me, it's just a normal dude that, I used to have roomed with, and him and his dad and that type of stuff. And we definitely knew, though, that even when he was like 13, 14, he was just so much better than us that we're, 3-4 years ahead of him. That he was going to, not that he would be the best ever or the best in the world, but he was special. I've learned a lot of things from him. One was really just watching through kind of osmosis how his father treated him. And, if people have seen the movies or the stuff about his father, who was, a Green Beret and, was in Vietnam, and just the things that he put him through. Like after a round of golf, we'd be playing in Palm Springs in the middle of summer. It's 120 degrees. I've got a little bit of girth on me. The kid's always just been a rail until he started working out. We'd be exhausted. He'd be dehydrated. Then he'd go through 2 hours of, a dissertation, shot by shot, and most importantly, thought by thought. It's definitely impacted me as a father, and not to, push my girls that way, because I would have never wanted to live that life. But I see why it made him so mentally strong. And I've applied some of those concepts to myself. And then also how, even into the short-term rental space and the real estate investing space, is how I visualize, and one of the big things for me that I learned through him, and then as I progressed ahead of him into college and then into professional golf, was just the power of positive visualization. And I'm not into, Tony Robbins manifesting your future and that stuff. I'm very practical, as you know, but I do believe that if I visualize where I want to go, then I have a much better chance of achieving that, as opposed to visualizing where I don't want to go. And most people, 90% of them plus, visualize the things the mistakes they don't want to make. They visualize the outcomes. I don't want to grow up poor. I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to have all these things. And that was kind of reiterated by a guy named Dr. Bob Rotella, who was the foremost sports psychologist of the early, probably all the way through the 90s. And when I worked with him is when it really clicked, that I saw Earl, Eldrick's dad, Tiger, we used to call him Eldrick's dad, would teach him these things. And then I kind of got it. I could recall him, what I saw him going through. And I caught a little bit of it. Earl would do a little bit of it with me if we were in the same hotel room or whatever. But that stuff has, stayed steadfast through me through my entire business career and as a father today. And those things I'm extremely grateful for. But I mean, a lot of people, I don't talk about it a lot, because then all people want to talk about is, oh my God, Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
To me, it's just like Bob or Joe or whoever you grew up with, doing whatever you did, playing soccer or whatever on the street, in Chicago. It's just nothing different.
So one of the stories that I heard you talk about is making everyone feel comfortable. And you shared your story of how you met the best golfer in the world, still to this day. You met him in the bathroom as you were taking a leak. Yeah. And the biggest takeaway that you had from that experience is making everyone feel comfortable. And that's something that I've experienced with you. You know, we did our first boot camp October 2021 at the SDR Wealth Conference both times, and then at the other boot camps that we do, you do an amazing job of making everyone feel comfortable. So I guess, how long after that event and then translating that into business did you have that takeaway right away, or was it something you realized over the course of a few years of how to make everyone feel comfortable?
So I'm 50, Ryan. That was 22 years ago, right? So I'm at the time I was 27. So, I mean, I'm already 10 years into my entrepreneurial career, you know, at that point, which I started when I was 17. And kind of the story goes is I was on the driving range at the 2001 US Open caddying for a friend of mine. And we were playing two groups behind Tiger, and we were hitting balls. I think we were practicing on Friday afternoon or Thursday. I can't remember the exact dates. But on the back of the range, there's these really nice, you know, porta potties. They're not porta potties. They're like literally little mobile homes that have like granite countertops and all that type of stuff. And I walk in, and I'm drinking, you know, hydrating all day, just filled with water, and it's like Austin Powers, man. I'm just ready to take a leak. Not to get too graphic. And there's 3 urinals. And I don't know about you, but guys typically don't go to the middle urinal when the other two are filled. So I go to the far urinal, and then all of a sudden I hear the door close, and then this guy walks up into the one right next to me. He could have left one, and literally I look over, I'm like, oh my God, it was Jack Nicklaus. And I just zip it up and walk back away, and he comes over. I'm washing my hands, and I'm doing really slow because I'm embarrassed, but also I want to meet him. But I'm not going to say anything to him while he's taking a leak. He gets over there, he puts his hands under the water, and he starts washing his hands, and he looks over. He's all, don't worry, happens to me too. I'm like, oh my God, he knows that I got stage fright. Had to zip it up and walk out. And I walked outside, and I'm standing outside the door. And I'm like, Mr. Nicholas, it's such a pleasure to meet you. He's like, you did wash your hands, didn't you? I'm like, he was joking, so I was standing right next to him. But he made me feel comfortable, and then we sat there and we chatted for a few minutes. Or else it's the one time, I mean, I've met Jordan. I've met a lot of great people. Jordan is not on the same level as Jack Nicklaus is to me. You know, Tiger Woods, who's arguably the second greatest or greatest now, definitely greatest of our generation. People can't speak to him. When I introduced my college, you know, golf, I was a collegiate college golf coach for a while. When I took them down to LA to meet Tiger, half of them couldn't talk because they idolized him so much. That's the way I felt with Jack Nicklaus. It made me feel comfortable. And a lot of that was just the humor involved, right? So, I mean, even when we're doing education and we're trying to build our brand and social and be online, there's really educational content and entertainment content. I'm not really good at the entertainment, so I've already dealt with the just the educational part online. And one of the things that happens is the more that we can be self-deprecating, I think the more that it makes people feel more comfortable. And that is something that I think I learned consciously and subconsciously from Jack.
Is how do you make people feel comfortable? And I mean, you do a great job of doing that. At least every time I've been around you at the conferences, you have people come up that have just met you or they've met you before, and you kind of break everything down to figure out where they're at and kind of meet them there, and you're able to help them in their scenario. Really, and I didn't learn this until I just listened to that story that you told yesterday and then today, but it's really about how do you make everyone feel comfortable, right?
I think part of it's just my personality, Ryan. You've gotten to know me pretty well. It's just what you see on stage or on camera is just how I am in real life, whether it's my cussing or my over bluntness and, you know, kind of no filter. I don't really do anything different. I think it's relatable for a lot of people. I'm sure there's people I offend with my profanity, and those just are people that probably aren't meant to be in my community or with me. But I think what becomes really important, I think it's small things. So like one of the things that I look at with that very short, you know, exchange with Jack, he looked me in the eye. You know, I'm 6'6". Jack's like 5'7", 5'8", right? So I'm towering over him by almost a foot. And he's looking me straight in the eye. I think one of the things that I learned when I started working with kids in my mid-20s, and I started actually early 20s, 23, 24, you know, even a little bit younger than you, when I was a college golf coach and playing professional golf and I'd work with little kids, it was about getting down on a knee and getting to their level. And I think that's the takeaway, is getting to their level. You know Amy Jakes. I remember the first time I spoke to Amy Jakes before she joined the mastermind. I was in the car with my family and my 2 girls, and I called her back and she's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm speaking to you. You're Bill Faeth," and blah, blah, blah. And she's like halfway screaming and my girls are in the back vomiting. And I literally just said, tried to make her feel comfortable. I don't know that it's anything specific or intentional, but I think it's the awareness, which a lot of people don't have awareness, but it's the awareness of always trying to make people feel comfortable and be open. And I think it's just part of it's being real.
Right. I wanted to get into a little bit how we originally got connected. So I think, I'm not sure, but the Build Short-Term Rental Wealth Facebook group, it's been around for over 2 years now, right?
3 years. Yeah, 3 years right about now.
Okay. 3 years now. And so I remember when I joined, and you could actually look at this, but I want to say I joined, it had to have been spring of 2021. So I wouldn't consider myself an OG member in there, but very towards the beginning, I think there might have been 3,000 or 4,000 people in there at the time. Right?
Right.
And I just started posting and commenting and really just trying to help other people out and answer their questions. I wasn't trying to sell anything. I was just there to provide value. And you had reached out and you had said, "You're doing it the right way. I'd love for you to come and chat with my mastermind group," which at the time was 30 people, 35 people maybe. And I remember getting on the webinar, having the call, having all these people ask questions and being able to answer their questions. And then it snowballed into something greater, right? You invited me to your boot camp, and then eventually I joined the mastermind and spoke at the inaugural STR Wealth Conference. And it's just been a blessing to kind of work alongside you and to be able to help. I mean, I've gotten tenfold out of what I put in from helping, and that's being with you. And that's another thing that you talk about is you always want to give more than you take. And that's why you have a no bullshit policy and a give more than you take policy within the mastermind. And I just wanted to, I guess, again, thank you for that, but then also wanted to have you shed a little light on how we kind of got connected and your experience so far.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Ryan, but it comes back to one thing. It's that...
Hey guys, I want to interrupt this episode real quick to let you know about our free short-term rental tax training that I have available now. It's going to teach you all the tax strategies that you need to know to optimize your short-term rental portfolio and to help you scale and achieve financial freedom. It only takes 2 hours to get through, so go check it out at the link below.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, Ryan, but it comes back to one thing. It's that you were doing the exact same thing I did to start building my brand, even before we talked about it. You were in my group, you were commenting, you were just helping people with, nothing, asking nothing in return. People kill the help part of it when they say, "Oh, by the way," or "Hey, let me sell you something." Then it just becomes, the help turns into marketing at that point, or sales. And that's the help part is kind of what I've built my entire second half of my career off of, really in the last third, I guess, in the last 10 or 12 years. It's just that I believe that if I do a good enough job of helping people, they will end up buying from me just based on reciprocity or trust, one of those two things. And hopefully it's trust. And I saw you doing that. And then for you to come and do all the stuff that you just mentioned, to go from, mastermind to boot camp to wealth conference, sure, it benefits you. But I think one of the things, and you said my no bullshit approach, and within the mastermind, it's really in my life. And being a coach, it's hard not to play favorites. And any coach that tells you they don't play favorites is full of shit. Because, and it's usually not the star player that, at least in my experience, when I'm a coach, whether it's now in coaching people in real estate, or if it's coaching in life, or if it's coaching golf. For me, it's the one that works the hardest, the one that absorbs what you're teaching and puts it into application and executes on it. And then you see, those, you see the results of that. And I think that's what my grandfather did to me, because I didn't have a father growing up. And my grandfather, who was a professional basketball player, a collegiate basketball coach, a high school basketball coach, just everything revolved around basketball for us. The hardest thing I ever had to do in my life, Ryan, was tell him I was quitting basketball to play golf full time. And he was my biggest supporter because I applied what he had taught me. And he sat me down and he said, Bill, you're doing everything right. You're exploring opportunities. You're going all in. You're putting in the effort. You're surrounding yourself with the right people. It doesn't matter what you do. As long as you keep doing these things, you're going to find what you love most and you're passionate about, and you're going to be successful. It doesn't have to be basketball. And that kind of changed everything for me in my life, because I didn't know that I could quit playing basketball, because my whole family, the heritage, had done it and done it at a high level. And, you know, that kind of changed things for me. And I think that's when I started really subconsciously at that young age. That was my sophomore year. I just won my first national golf championship, and that's when I decided I was going to do that full time. And that probably really helped me moving forward. But you need these triggers, right? These things happen in our life. And I think that story about Jack Nicklaus was one of them. You know, and then another one, that John Bairden, when he came into my life. But we all have these opportunities, and I think we all have these trigger points. The question is I used this word earlier, is how aware are we of what's going on, right? Whether it's making people feel comfortable, whether it's, you know, seizing opportunities that are put in front of us. You know, I think awareness is a tremendous skill that a lot of people don't possess.
That's a great segue to what I wanted to talk about next. And you've taught me that a little bit too, about that sort of that law of reciprocity, right? If you give something to somebody, they're more likely to and inclined to give back to you what they feel that they have received also.
Yeah, and I'm going to interrupt you for a second, because the real fucking deal is that you came into my mastermind and you didn't have a hook. You didn't try to sell them anything. You just helped them. You answered questions. You did everything right. Then you came to the boot camp and you didn't sell anything on the back end. You were just there to educate and give. And, you know, and I know that you got clients out of the mastermind. I know that you got clients out of the boot camp. That's why you're there, right? But if you do it the right way, you build the reputation of not being sleazy, not being the salesperson, and being that giver. It's John Boyens, who was probably the most influential sales coach I ever had, said you have to give more than you expect to receive. It's give to get. That's our mantra. Give to get. If you want to get something without being the used car salesperson slime ball, then you have to give. And I just want to point out that I've seen you do that over the last 2 years, and you continue to do that. And I think that's one of the big reasons why you're flourishing.
Right. One of the things you talked about too is sometimes you could have multiple life-changing moments or events. So you talked about how your life changed 5 or 6 times because of the people that you've met, but it also sounds like you've had a lot of great coaches along the way. So could you go through that? Who are some of those coaches that you've had or still have to this day?
Yeah. I mean, my grandfather was probably the biggest impact on my young life. You know, I didn't have a father growing up, and, you know, he was kind of my father figure. He would come, my mom was single, only child. She was an only child with my grandparents. I was an only child, no father. My grandparents lived in South Dakota. They'd come to California and live with us for 3-4 months during the winter, during basketball season. I think I'm a good student because of them. Everybody in my family was in education and athletics. Lowell Manzer, who in high school, my girlfriend was the best player in the world in golf. We were on the same high school golf team. She was a year older than me. Lowell Manzer was her coach. He took me under his wing, and when we started dating, and coached me. You know, probably work ethic wise is my mother. But then after that, it was Buck Owens. If anybody knows Buck Owens from Hee Haw, or you know, he really created the Bakersfield sound, and he's literally one of the godfathers of country music. And, you know, if he didn't take me under his wing and give me $25,000 when I dropped out of UCLA and left a full ride scholarship to play professional golf, and my grandparents, who were both still alive at the time, my mom said, you know, if you're giving up a full ride scholarship, you're on your own. And I was on my own, and I had nothing, no money, anything. I had to get an apartment and pay for that. I had to get a truck, I had to pay for that. And I was going to go play professional golf, and he gave it to me, no strings attached. Well, there was one string. He said, you can't come back and ever ask. He gave, I didn't have to ask for it. And he's all, but you run out of money, I'm not your bank. And luckily I was good enough, early enough, to make some money to where I didn't have to go back from him. And back in the day, Ryan, we all the struggling golfers, you know, that weren't on the PGA Tour, literally would sell shares in themselves for like $5,000 a pop, and you had like 10 or 15 owners of you. I could never imagine doing that. So I made it work, and had a 5-year career, and I think Buck was a huge one. Reginald Booth in my glow golf business, who's still a father figure to me today. Him and I grew the glow golf business. Bree and I started by buying a franchise from him for a company called Glow Range, which was Top Golf before Top Golf in the late 90s. He's still been a tremendous impact. John Bairden is the one that, helped me build, the life plan that we were talking about. And I was fortunate enough to have him come to the SCR Wealth Conference and sit in the front row the first day. And I got to acknowledge him because that's one thing that I think is really important. And when you have the reciprocity mentality, is when somebody helps you, whether it's paid or not, at least for me, I feel indebted to help them back. And a lot of people don't think about it that way. They think, oh, that person is, above me. I don't need to do anything for them. I continue to mention John a lot. He's not in the coaching business. He doesn't do anything like that. But I just want to give my gratitude and let people know I just didn't think of this stuff on my own. Those are 4 or 5 people that have had a significant impact in my life.
Right. And one of the things that I was personally curious about is, I guess, how did you know when it was the right time to get out of the glow golf business and go into the ground transportation business? And then how did you know when it was time to get out of that business and go into the real estate or short-term rental business?
Yeah. So, I've done 29 startups. For me, I'm just not really a big company guy. I joke and say I'm really an unsuccessful entrepreneur because 7 of them failed, that didn't I just shut them down. They either didn't get acquired or, sold or turned into an annuity or whatever. I think a lot of it has to do with the type of business. I'll use a ground transportation company as an example. I kind of got into that with just spur of the moment and really out of animosity because I was a corporate traveler at that time, and I was actually up in your area. I was opening a glow-in-the-dark miniature golf course in Gurnee Mills and flying in and out of Chicago, and I had to go up to Gurnee to have a zoning meeting to get a space rezoned from retail to assembly inside of Gurnee Mills Mall. And the ground transportation company here, and it was in 2006, they were late, didn't show up to pick me up. I'm talking not like Uber, that stuff wasn't around. A legitimate ground transportation company. It was Signature Transportation here. And I was pissed because there was a guy out of Memphis, Bubba Patton, that was paying me to do his permitting stuff and all of those things for him. We were selling him a franchise. Long story short, I missed the meeting. Cost him a month, $18,000 in rent for this 12,000 square foot space. Almost cost me a client. I had to give back my $10,000 retainer, to him. So it cost me money. I was pissed. I got back. I went to my buddy down the street, Neil Lauren, and said, hey, this car company, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. I said, I've already, on the way back, I found a car. We're starting a limousine company together. So it was kind of out of spite. It was out of anger. Wow. The only time I've really started a company like that. But I grew to just under $10 million in revenue. And the reason I left is because of how heavy it was. So I've always had multiple businesses going on at one time. I can't even remember a time that I only had one business. It had to be back in when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. I do believe in having multiple revenue streams. I learned through that glow golf business. It was the largest one with employees. We had like 782 employees at one time. That was not something that I enjoyed. Even in the restaurant business in the early days with Bria, my wife, back in California, when we had 50, 60, 70 employees, didn't really enjoy that at all. I don't like that back office stuff. So I've intentionally architected my life over the last 10 to 15 years, really 10 to 13 years since I exited the ground transportation space, to not put myself into businesses that are going to have be very labor heavy. One, from a margin standpoint, from just a financially driven decision standpoint on the business side. But two, employees are challenging to deal with. Doesn't matter what level they are. And the more employees you have, the more time that it takes. So I can't really say that I know each one per se of when it's to get in, when it's to get out of and exit. I mean, still one of my original companies from 1992 is still in business, but it's an annuity for me today. One of my high school friends owns 80% and I own 20%. And those are the actual deals that I like. It's like when I sold Bellaqua bikinis to Venus Swimwear in 1994. I turned down multiple $1 million in cash up front to take a 7%, residual commission in perpetuity. And thank God for my CPA convincing me to do that. Or my life would be completely different. I mean, I was like 23 years old at the time, and I would have taken the cash. I probably would have blown it in Vegas gambling, to be honest with you. I think everyone's different. There's not like these, red light goes off and there's these specific triggers. It's not the money part. I just think there's different reasons for, and I think a lot of the life component plays into that, right? And that was one of the things in the ground transportation space. It was the heaviest business I'd ever been in, time consuming wise. It was the lowest margin business. I loved it, but I just didn't have enough time with my family, and I had other businesses that were more profitable with less time investment.
Yeah, those CPAs can be some pretty smart people sometimes.
Once in a while, if you can find a good one.
That's a really good segue, because I know you talked a lot, and we talk a lot about in our accelerator coaching program too, the idea of cash on cash return versus overall cash flow, and kind of how that develops in your life plan. And you've made it pretty clear. I don't care if I have 50. I don't want 50 doors. I don't want 100 doors like John Hodge. I want to have 10 to 13 properties, right? Or at least the least amount of properties that's making the most amount of revenue, net income that I need for my cash flow goals.
100%. I don't know why anybody would think any differently unless they're trying to grow something strategically from an acquisition standpoint, which I think is really hard to do, and build that business organically that way without making strategic acquisitions, which, the hedge fund or the private equity would do on their own anyways. For me, what I've learned, and you and I have talked about this, you're 25 years younger than me. You're in a completely different space in your life than where I'm at. I'm 50. So really, as I re-architected my life, really starting in 2015, it kind of started when I sold the ground transportation company in 2011. But in 2015, when I met John Baird and started re-architecting it, everything became super intentional with that outcome, in place. And the outcome is detailed. And the outcome involves not just like financial outcomes or age retirement incomes, but it also has those life events that will define those outcomes as well. And those life events are typically what either extends the deadline for like retirement or brings it closer. So learning those things and putting an actual plan together is what made it a lot easier for me when I migrated from commercial and, long-term residential real estate and went all in on short-term rentals. It was about cash on hand, and it was about cash flow, right? And that's at the higher level. That's not at the micro level of actually buying an individual property. And that's where I think people kind of get mistaken when they look at, I'm going to buy in a market. Well, then you got your sub-market, then you have the individual property, right? So for me, it was $15 million in liquidity, and it was $800,000 a year in cash flow. And I wanted to get to that as quickly as I could, because I've had some pretty traumatic life events in my life professionally. One was the Great Recession in the ground transportation space. Well, we lost 40% of our revenue overnight as an industry. I've been through COVID, and watch companies like Stay Alfred, who was probably the largest arbitrage company, go out of business in less than 45 days because they didn't have enough cash. So kind of going through all those things and learning from John and the mistakes that he had made as a 2-time Fortune 500 CEO, as a father, as a husband, kind of set the plane of, one, what I wanted to avoid, but two, what I wanted to achieve. But there's one thing that always stuck with me, Ryan, that I never thought about. And John made it very clear that every single thing we write down, every goal, every priority, whatever it is, you have to be able to keep score. And that's something like, probably one of the mistakes I made, Ryan, is I shouldn't have tried to do this whole plan thing at the SDR Wealth Conference in 45 minutes, because I usually only do it with like my couples retreats and stuff, and it takes a couple of days versus a 45-minute session. But if you can learn to keep score, and then you can unilaterally come together with your significant other, your spouse, your husband, your wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and be unified, then you're working for that common goal. But one of the key things is, for my wife and I, is that we audit every Friday. Auditing is something that is, I know that's a standardized term for you and your choice of work, Ryan, in the financial sector as a CPA, but there's not enough auditing that's talked about personally for us as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a business owner, and there's not enough auditing with our real estate portfolios either.
Right. The life plan, actually, the first time I seen you break that out was in Gulf Shores in January 2022, and it was really interesting and eye-opening to see kind of everybody's sort of come to Jesus moment of when everything kind of finally clicked. But like you had mentioned, it did take a few days to get there. And it, again, like you said, it's not a property basis. It's here, what are these high-level goals, and how do you audit that detailed? I think I remember you say you do every Friday. You spend a couple hours with your wife going through what that looks like. But I mean, I don't think there's anybody out there that's talking about the overall financial life plan. Everybody's just talking about, okay, here's what you do for your next deal.
That's because they're just thinking tactically, right? The strategic stuff isn't sexy. And I mean, the interesting thing about it is I hit my financial goals right around the time that you and I met, a year and a half, 2 years ago, or whenever it was in person. And now it's maintenance. Now it's optimization. You know, and I will probably have less properties when I actually retire. So a lot of people say, okay, well, Bill, you hit your financial goals. Why aren't you retired? Well, I've got a 14-year-old that's, you know, at freshman soccer camp right now, practice. She's got 4 years left of high school. I've got a senior in high school at the same high school. I've got kids in school. Those are the life events that money can't control. Right? It doesn't matter how much money you have. I'm not just going to pull them out of school, pull them out of athletics, and put them homeschool and just go travel the world. And that's part of the plan that we have to figure out. I had to take care of my mother for 4 years. When I retired her to the Villages down in Florida, and then she had to move up here, move in with us. Then Bree and I couldn't take care of her. Then I had to put her into a facility. And my mom told me she was flat broke, and I was spending $8,000 a month for 4 years. That's like $360,000 that I didn't plan for. Well, then I found out she was a millionaire when she passed away, Ryan. That's always nice. But
Wow.
those life events are things that we don't plan for. So a lot of people say, Ryan, how do you, if I'm 25, how do I plan for the future? You got to think about college. You got to think about weddings. You got to think about houses that you're going to live in. You got to think about all these things. So I've budgeted what I've saved for my daughters for college, for their weddings. I'm thinking about life events with my father-in-law, Bria's father, that's not in great health. What's it going to cost me to take care of her mother? I do know their finances. And, you know, they'll be okay. It's not going to cost me a lot of money, but it's going to be a responsibility time-wise for Bria and I. So we're making decisions right now of where we're investing. We're making decisions right now of where we're investing and where we want to live versus what we think we'll actually be able to do. Our goal was never to have a home base when we retired, and that goal was supposed to be when I was 60. I'm just turned 50 last month. My youngest daughter's got 4 years of high school. We're ready to go when she's out of high school and in college, but I've also got to think about the in-laws. So initially, Ryan, we were going to sell this house that I'm in Nashville right now. I've got about $1.3 million in equity in it today. Hopefully I'll have more then, and then we would move someplace else. But now, because of all these life events, and it looks like my oldest daughter is going to go to school here in Nashville, which means she's probably going to stay here most likely. Mm-hmm. The likelihood of my youngest daughter following suit in some fashion increases if that happens. So I'm probably going to need a home base here. So do I want to keep my $2 million house, and add a pool and, continue to fix it up? I think we owe like $300,000 or $400,000 on it, whatever. And keep that, 2.8% interest rate. Or do I plan on selling and then buying something else, downsizing smaller? Well, if we know we're going to stay here, then I'm probably just going to keep this exact same house because I don't need anything more. And if I was to sell this today and repurchase now or 5 years from now, it's going to cost me more for that smaller house. So I'm thinking about all these different forecasting of issues in life and inflation, in business, and for my kids and my family that all plays a part into creating that plan. And the interesting thing that John Bairden taught me is a lot of people think they've got to type out their plan, put it in ink, write it in pen, and they got to follow it. That's not the purpose of putting a plan together. The purpose of putting the plan together is so you have a framework that's adaptable, but most importantly, that you've gone through the exercise. Yeah. Because now you have a much more intimate relationship with your desired outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the, I mean, if I've learned anything from you, it's how designed you are and everything that you do when it comes to, whether putting on an event or hosting, even just a webinar or a Zoom, putting our mastermind Zoom meetings together or our accelerator coaching calls, is how thought out it is. And I think that's something that a lot of people are missing, is they're just thinking one step ahead, two steps ahead. They're not thinking of what's your overall life goal. I mean, how many times do you and I get questions, through Instagram or through some of the various programs where it's this looks like a one-dimensional question, but it's really a more thought out process.
Hey, Ryan, check out this place in, Savannah, Georgia. Should I buy it?
No idea.
We get that all the time, right?
Yeah.
And it's so much more in depth than that. And I think, unfortunately, people look at it at that level, and that's what leads to making bad decisions. At the very least, you need to be thinking 3 deals down the road. And the deal may not be just 3 short-term rentals. The deal may be purchase a short-term rental, college 2 years down the road, new primary residence purchase within the next 36 months. All of those things affect one another. And I don't think a lot of people look at it that way.
Yeah, and you always say the quote about hockey of, I'm not skating to where the puck is at, I'm skating where the puck's going to be. I use the pool analogy of, I'm not worried about the next shot. I'm not worried about the shot at hand, but I'm worried about where my cue ball is going to lie to set up that next shot.
And there's 2 factors in that, right, Ryan? It's not only it's lie for you to set up your next shot if you make it, but also if you do happen to miss, you don't want to set up your opponent either, right?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that one. That's something I talked about at the STR Wealth Conference. That's the number one place where I see people fail to scale, is they're not aware of their debt to income. So I see 2 scenarios, actually multiple scenarios, but let me give you 2. So one scenario would be they figure out that they could do a 10% down secondary home loan. They have their primary residence and they're borrowing using that 10% down secondary home, and then they throw out their DTI. Well, maybe their cash flow from their rental properties affords one of the spouses to leave their W-2. But what does that do to their what does that do to their bankability? What does that do to their lending? Oh, and now short-term rental bookings are down. So they're having less overall cash flow, and now they don't have the money to come out of pocket for that, right? Or I see people run up their DTI, max out their borrowing power, and then quit their W-2 job. So I've just seen people make mistakes because they haven't thought out multiple steps in advance.
Agreed, 100%. I think people think that people don't understand. I think people are getting it now, Ryan, because we've been talking about it for such a long time. But when a W-2 leaves, that consistency, verified income to become an entrepreneur, it's way harder to qualify at that point. But also they think if they're making $200,000 a year, they need $200,000 in rental income to be able to replace that. There's a lot of these small mistakes, I think, that happen, and they don't really understand that desired outcome. If I was a W-2 today, in today's landscape, I probably would not leave my job. And I've advised people, I said, I don't care how much you hate it, just hang on for another 12 to 24 months and let's see what shakes out here. Because it's going to be way harder to go back, especially if you're middle age, to get back into that same position laterally.
Well, I think that wraps it up for today. Is there anything else you wanted to chat about?
No, I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. Hopefully it's valuable to everybody that's out there. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up anytime. I'm at BillFaeth73. Last name's Faeth, at BillFaeth73 on Instagram.
And where can people find you on the Facebook group?
Build Short-Term Rental Wealth everywhere. That's .com, Facebook group, YouTube, pretty much on every channel.
Well, awesome. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Ryan.